Hello everybody and welcome back to another Walking Dead video, and today we will be doing my rewrites for season 4 of The Walking Dead. And as always, I do have rules that I have to follow and I cannot break them because it would end up too much like fan fiction. So what are my rules? Well, first of all, I have to keep somewhat relevant and loyal to the adaptation story. I cannot be like, oh, I don't like this, or for example, I don't like all of the prison arc with the walkers and the plague, I'll cut that out and do more governor stuff. Well, no, because it would end up too much like fanfiction. So I have to keep it in there some way, so I have to keep aspects of the story the same, but I can change the way it happens. Also, I cannot avoid death. Death is inevitable. I can delay it by a couple episodes, or I can push it forwards. But I cannot just be like, that character cannot die. I can switch out character deaths. So, for example, when I had Andrea survive in Season 3 and I killed Sasha to replace her. Also, if an actor stated at any point they left the show and it was their idea to leave the show, they weren't written off, for example, Dale from Season 2, I have to kill off that character. I cannot be like, no, I'm going to avoid that. No, I have to kill them off because that's an external force. So those are my rules. Let's move on to what my rewrites are from Season 3 that I'm carrying over to Season 4. Well, the biggest ones is that Andrea is still alive, Sasha is dead, Morgan is with the group and joined in Season 3, and Glenn now has one hand. So now that we know the rules and the rewrites I currently have, let's move on to episode 1. So season 4 will pick up about 12 to 14 months after season 3. So this is about March, April time of 2012 to get the gist of what seasons we're in. So we've skipped another winter and we've aged up Carl again, so we're not going to have the issue of Carl being 18 when he's actually 12. So we have a 12-year-old Carl about then. And so the big difference is that Michonne and Andrea are both going out to look for the governor, and any shots with Sasha in this episode are replaced with Michonne, and kinda Andrea's taking Michonne's roles in this episode. The entire story with all the plots with Daryl and everything is all the same. The only difference is going to be Rick's plot. And Rick's plot's going to be quite a bit different because we got Morgan. I want to have Morgan's arc this season kind of be a bit like Here's Not Here in Season 6. So I'll be adapting that throughout the season with Morgan here and there. So we start off with this plot with Rick, which is the only different plot this episode. And it is Rick and Morgan go on a supply run together as Rick's trying to help Morgan. Morgan's still struggling. We still kind of have clear Morgan, but he's no longer killing people on sight. So we have Rick and Morgan going out and run, and like in the actual episode, they meet this girl. Rick being more trustworthy than he is in the show. He's like, okay, we can help this girl because he's now really Farmer Rick. But Morgan is still like, now we can't trust them. So this plot with Rick and Morgan is them going through trying to help this girl find her husband until the end where we find out he's dead and the woman basically tries to kill herself to him. Rick stops her and ends up having to fight off some walkers and fight off this husband while she instead grabs a knife and intends to stab herself. Morgan lets this happen. So as Rick is fighting off walkers, he looks over and sees Morgan just standing there, able to stop this woman, but Morgan chooses not to save her. He lets her kill herself. And this episode ends with Morgan and Rick, after she died, kind of going through her things. And Morgan's going to find the book that gets given in the actual show in Season 6. And it's the All Life is Precious book. He finds that, and then he takes it, and they go back to prison. And that is kind of the end of the episode. And they're my rewrites for Episode 1. Episode 2's rewrites is this basically episode is just the same as Episode 2. However, all of Sasha's scenes are Andrea's scenes. So that's the only difference for Episode 2. Episode 3 is much the same as Episode 3 in the show, but all of Sasha's scenes are Andrea's scenes. So Andrea is getting Sasha's story arc for the sickness arc in the first half of Season 4. There is no scenes between Andrea and Tyrese because there's no bond there. So all the scenes between Andrea and Tyrese where Tyrese is comforting Sasha in the show, that is Michonne comforting Andrea. We do get a scene at the end with Michonne telling Carol to look after Andrea, and by the end of this episode, Morgan is being suspected by Rick to be the one that killed Karen and Davis, not Carol. So Rick thinks it's Morgan because of what Morgan did in episode 1 by letting that woman kill herself. Episode 4 follows the plot of episode 4 and is basically all the same with Daryl and that subplot. The only difference is everything to do with Rick's plot. So in this episode, Rick takes Morgan and Carol out for help to go on a run. This episode mostly plays out the same, just with Morgan around, until the end, where Rick, knowing Morgan and believes Morgan's a danger to the group, he basically tries in a way to put down Morgan. But Carol intervenes and ends up giving Morgan the chance to leave instead of being shot by Rick. Now moving on to my rewrites episode 5. This episode is basically the same as episode 5 in the show of Herschel. I think just Andrea is taking all of Sasha's scenes. I move on to episode 6. This is where I will have the governor episode. I'm condensing both episodes down into just one, and it will be, I'll imagine this is as an extended episode so you can tell both episodes but in a condensed manner. So the first half of this episode, more like the first maybe 10 to 15 minutes, will be the start of episode 6, where we get the governor, and it goes all the way the same up into the flat, but instead of finding Tara and the family there like he does in the show, he just finds this sick woman and a child. And within the first night, the sick woman passes away, and now the governor is stuck with this just child that's like undefensible, so he decides to take on her because he feels bad and he has a father figure, so he becomes this father for this child. And 6 to 9 months pass later, and we get the end of episode 6, where the governor gets caught by his old group. And everything goes the same there, where he's like, I don't want power, I just want to look after this guy. And the leaders are like, okay, yeah, you can join. And this is where we meet Tara. Tara is a part of this new group that, I'm going to call him Marcus. So Tara is a part of Marcus's group. And the way the back half of this episode plays out is a lot like episode 7 of the show. But the motivation for the governor to take power and take the prison is slightly different. His motivation is he wants to protect this girl, and the reason why he takes out all the leadership and becomes a leader to go and attack the prison is because in the first few nights they get attacked by this group and they kill quite a few people, and the governor can clearly see that the leadership of this group is not up to standard and they're going to get everyone killed. And him knowing, okay, this child is going to die, he goes full parental figure and he takes everyone out so he can take leadership, so he can take over the prison, so he can save his surrogate daughter. That is his kind of motivation, and that's why the stuff in this episode happens. Now moving on to episode 7, this is the plot of episode 8. It is more or less the same, with kind of no governor romance scenes. Any scenes between the governor and someone in the camp will be with Tara, who's looking after the child, or the child. So that's all those scenes. Everything going on the back though, once the fight actually starts, we're going to have some big changes here. So Herschel still gets his death, that's all the same. But the big changes is that we get Carol and Beth taking the kids out to try and escape. Beth is holding baby Judith in that like kind of cradle thing, and a stray bullet, bam, hits Beth. Beth dies and gets Laurie's comic death and drops the box, or whatever, I forgot what it's called, car seat that Judith is in. Carol just keeps on going. She's got to get the other two kids out there. She keeps on going. And then the governor fight doesn't end by Michonne like it does in the episode. In my rewrites, the governor fight will be stopped by Morgan coming over, and he kind of stabs the governor and gets Rick, and Morgan leaves the group with Rick and Carl. He takes Rick and Carl and gets out of there while Rick and Carl believe that Judith is dead. Michonne will come back later and be the one to finish off the governor in my rewrites, not the governor's like new girlfriend like is in the show. Michonne comes back, she sees the governor bleeding out, and she just stabs him in the throat. Episode 8 will follow the plot of episode 9 in my rewrites, minus everything to do with Michonne. We're getting no Michonne backstory this episode. And this episode will focus more on the Carl plot from the show, but it'll be with some slight differences. And the differences is that Morgan's there, and this episode would be kind of a Morgan and Carl episode, where after they get Rick to the house and Rick passes out. This episode focuses on Morgan and Carl, and Morgan believing he's helping Carl. He's trying to teach Carl how to live in this world and scavenge and be on the move all the time. So the premise of this episode is that they're scavenging, but while they're scavenging, Morgan's making Carl do more and more dangerous things to be like, you need to know this skill, you need to know this skill. And by the end of this episode, Morgan almost gets Carl killed, and he realizes he's not helping at all. He just almost endangered Rick's son and almost made Rick go through what he's gone through. And it gets to the point where Morgan takes Carl back to where Rick's house is, and Rick is still unconscious, and he just leaves. He realizes that he is a danger to Rick and Carl if he stays around. So we see in the last shot, Morgan leaves and he's walking down this road, and we see him whip out of his pocket the book that he got in episode 1. And that is the last shot of this episode, and the last shot we see of Morgan. Episode 9 will be a lot like the show episode 10, but my rewrites will be that Carol is the one with the kids, not Tyrese, and later on she comes across Tyrese with baby Judith. That's the only difference with that plot. And the Daryl plot is completely different. Just because Beth is dead, we can't get anything with Daryl and Beth in the back half of the season. So Daryl's plot this episode and his subplot will be about Daryl surviving alone again, and his plot will end with Daryl getting jumped by the Claimers and Joe, the leader of the Claimers, taking a liking to Daryl, and the plot ends with Daryl joining the Claimers. The other difference with the plot will be that Michonne is taking Sasha's place in Maggie's group. That's all the same there, just with Michonne there now. And that Glenn's plot, because he has one hand, he won't be able to do as much as the action as he can in the show. So with the subplot with Glenn, it'll be slightly different. As Glenn's got one hand and he's still slightly sick, when he tries to escape the prison, he gets overrun, and Tara is the one to save him. Tara will take more of a protective role over Glenn. Instead of in the show, Glenn just basically just talks Tara back into reality. Tara is already in reality, and she's more of a fighter in my rewrites. So she basically carries Glenn out of the prison, and she looks after Glenn, and this episode ends the same once they are out of the prison. Moving on to episode 10, and this episode will be based on episode 11, so we'll have the plots of Glenn and Rick. So everything with the Rick plot is the same, but Andrea is replacing all of Michonne's scenes. There is a scene in episode 11 where Michonne's crying about a child and stuff like that. Because we don't have no backstory for Andrea, those scenes are cut completely, and we get more focus on Rick slaughtering people silently. The stuff on the Glenn side, however, is more different. This is because, as Glenn's got one hand, and I have him still very much sick, Tara is the more dominant force and the one to stand up to Abraham more than Glenn. Glenn is just trying to hold it together in this episode, while Tara, who's feeling guilty for what she did to the prison and feeling guilty that she separated Glenn and Maggie, she is way more dominant and she is way more aggressive to Abraham, and takes a couple of Glenn's scenes when Glenn is standing up to Abraham. That is Tara in my rewrites. Episode 11 will be almost exactly the same as episode 14, the Carol/Grove episode. The only difference is that we get the big revelation at the end of this episode that Morgan isn't the one that killed Karen and David. It was actually Carol, and she admits this to Tyrese at the end of the episode in an emotional scene. And that is kind of the only difference I'll have in this episode, just being the plot twist that Carol was actually the murderer, not Morgan, and that Rick drove Morgan away. Episode 12 will be a mix from plots from both episode 13 and episode 15. I'll have 3 plots in total. The first plot will be the Bob plot, and this plot will have a rewrite with it being Michonne taking a lot of Sasha's places. Because Sasha's dead, Michonne takes all of Sasha's story, and will focus more on the relationship being built between these two characters and less about Michonne trying to convince Maggie and Bob to go, Glenn's dead, we're not going back. So that is the focus of that plot. We'll also find out that Michonne is going to be the one to find Bob in the flashback, not Daryl and Glenn. Plot B will be the Claimers plot, with Daryl from episode 15, and it'll be exactly the same as that plot. The plot C plot will be the Glenn one from episode 13, and this will focus on Glenn trying to find Maggie and Tara really helping. So everything will be same from that episode, all the plot will be the same, but there'll be a cut-off point where they separate and they get to the tunnel and Glenn's like, we gotta go through it, and Tara's like, yeah, we're going through it, and Abraham's like, no. So they split off, and that is where the episode ends, with the two groups going away. We have Maggie going towards the tunnel on the other side, or looking for it. They're going to look for Glenn with Michonne and Bob. We have Daryl ending it with the Claimers, and we have the plot C ending with Tara and a one-handed, still sickly Glenn entering this blocked, dark and dangerous tunnel. And that's the end of episode 12. Episode 13 will be the season finale of season 4, and the main plot of this episode is everything to do with Rick from episode 16. So everything to do with Rick and the Claimers and Rick at Terminus, that is all exactly the same. I, however, will be rewriting and removing all the flashback scenes which are in the first half of the episode, and that will instead pick up where we left Glenn and Abraham and them lot at the end of episode 12. So we'll get the back half of that story from episode 15 at the start of this episode, and about the halfway mark is when Glenn and Maggie will meet and end up heading to Terminus just before Rick gets there, and then the episode will carry on the same from that point onwards. We will have more of a horror aspect with Glenn though, as he's got one hand. It will seem more dire before Abraham and them lot save them, with Glenn becoming his own and maybe learning to use his hand more, or his lack of hand should I say, more when he fights. And those are my rewrites. The episode will end the same once we get Glenn to Terminus, and the Rick stuff is all exactly the same this episode, just with Andrea taking Michonne's place. But please tell me down below, what do you think of my rewrites? Did you like it? Did you dislike it? What do you think my big changes with Morgan being in the season and Morgan kind of leaving? What do you think about my option to kill off Beth this early on and not have her in for season 5? What do you think about it? And please tell me down below, what would your rewrites be? I'd like to know your opinions, your thoughts and everything. And if you want more Walking Dead content, please look on the screen. If you want my previous seasons rewrites, look in the top right hand side for season 3, and if you want something that's recommended for you, look at the bottom. But remember to subscribe if you want more Walking Dead content, and if you want to see the next rewrites, make sure to subscribe and like this video for season 5 coming soon. And this is it for me today, so goodbye, peace out, and I'll talk to you at a later date.